Africanism and solidarity between African Americans and Africans. So they're going to get into this process of translation. Fortunately, this thing failed, didn't necessarily work out, largely because of funding, which is something we can talk about too, about the black future and funding. Funding for the black future, is it possible? But nevertheless, this is a picture of Dudley Randall. Oftentimes, although this was a youth-centered, a youth-driven movement, people in their teens to 20s, you also had people of the other generation, older generation, who are serving as the supportive network for these artists. Dudley Randall was older. Detroit started Broadside Press and beginning to publish a lot of these artists that are really kind of known to us today. The Nikki Giovanni's, the Gwendolyn Brooks, the Sonia Sanchez's. Dudley Randall plays a very, very important role in that. And here's an example of the type of journals that are coming out at the time. You have the Journal Black Theater. I mentioned other black journals that are specific to specific forms, artistic forms. Poetry journals, short stories, theater journals, and then of course, largely political journals that had artistic components to it, where they feature poetry, photographs, and other forms of art. This form of black cultural expression, central to the strategy of black art memory making for the purposes of nationalist identity formation was an engagement with Africa in its real and imagined forms. Black arts represented the past both in the context of time and space. The former related to the slave trade and slavery, the latter related to Africa. This form of black cultural expression prioritized Africa that stood in stark contrast to fixed representations in Western thought and culture. It came to signify the primary metaphor in which black artists could equate blackness with Africanness, and Africa represented a psychic space in which Africa, as an originary space as well, legitimized claims of black nationalist identity through a process of reclaiming Africa as a lost and forgotten home. This represents that, I guess the best way to talk about it is a kind of recovering of a traumatic memory, historical memory, recovering of a moment during the slave trade where this artist is able to take the tools of coercion, the shackles, and be able to mold it into a piece of art.
I was born in the Congo. I walked to the Fertile Crescent and built the Sphinx. I designed a pyramid so tough that a star that only glows every 100 years falls into the center, giving divine perfect light. I am bad. I sat on the throne drinking nectar with Allah. I got hot and sent an ice age to Europe to cool my thirst. My oldest daughter is Nefertiti. The tears from my birth pains created the Nile. I am a beautiful woman. I gazed on the forest and burned out the Sahara Desert. With a packet of goat's meat and a chain of clothes, I crossed it in 2 hours. I'm a gazelle, so swift, you can't catch me. For a birthday present when he was 3, I gave my son Hannibal an elephant. He gave me Rome for Mother's Day. My strength grows ever on. My son Noah built Newark, and I stood proudly at the head as we sailed on a soft summer day. I turned myself into myself and was Jesus. Men intone my loving name. All praises, I am the one who would save. I sowed diamonds in my backyard. My vows delivered uranium. The filings from my fingernails are semi-precious jewels. On a trip north, I caught a cold and blew my nose, giving oil to the Arab world. I am so hip, even my errors are correct. I sailed west to reach east and had to round off the earth as I went. The hair from my head thinned and gold was laid across 3 continents. I am so perfect, so divine, so ethereal, so surreal, I cannot be comprehended except by my permission. I mean, I fly like a bird in the sky.
The results are contradictory and intriguing. As Giovanni Ponmi attests, Africa is positioned as a pre-colonial land of wealth and natural resources, an ancient civilization so grand, one cannot speak about its power without speaking about it in boastful terms. Or take Norman Jordan's Black Warrior poem. At night, while Whitey sleeps, the heat of 1,000 African fires burns across my chest. I hear the beat of a war drum dancing from a distant land, dancing across a mighty water, telling me to strike. Enchanted by this wild call, I hurl a brick through a storefront window and disappear. The essence of Africa, or being African, was embodied in a kind of warrior figure, and in that essence, as Jordan explains, lays the dormant, here the essence of Africa, or being African, was embodied in the warrior figure, and it is that essence, as Jordan explains, that lays dormant in the black subconscious. Only in extreme moments of lingering social collapse, where the threats to one's being is under constant pressure, can the primal characteristic be tapped to facilitate individual acts of resistance. With art and politics, even in terms of political organizations, art was a key feature in the type of messages that political organizations like the Black Panther Party were trying to put forth. I bring up this picture not only because of its African representation, but also because of the photographer who actually did this. His name was Francisco Newman. Francisco Newman, out of the Bay Area, attended Merritt College when Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, the two founders of the Black Panther Party, were at Merritt College, basically in a study group involved with the Revolutionary Action Movement. A lot of people don't know about this movement. This was really a more secret organization that was talking about armed struggle, urban armed guerrilla struggle in the early 1960s. Not in 65, 67, these guys were doing it way before. Set up a little study group, Merritt College in the Bay Area, Huey P. Newton, Bobby Seale were there, and out of that comes the Black Panther Party. Francisco Newman, the photographer of this picture, this iconic photograph of Huey P. Newton, in an interview about 2 years ago, was talking about this picture and why he ended up, or really reflecting back on the picture years later, after the story of Huey P. Newton, the Black Panther Party came to a close. And oftentimes when we think about Huey P. Newton and that story, we get two different types of Huey P. Newtons. We get the Huey P. Newton that's represented in this picture, Huey P. Newton, the kind of model of revolutionary black manhood. And then we also get the Huey P. Newton that was getting into drugs, that was killed, robbed, right? And when Francisco Newman was talking about this, he said something I found really interesting. At least Huey stood up to the man. That's what we remember Huey for. Maybe he punked out, flamed out, or pimped out somewhere along the line. But at his apex, in his glory, at his highest moment, he stood up to the injustice of man. Francisco will go on further and talk about the thought behind positioning, behind taking this photograph. He found Huey P. Newton to be very tough to deal with, but it was this guy who was choosing various elements to put in the photograph. If you look at there was a movie came out on Black Panther that said that really Bobby Seale, or what's his name, Elgin Cleaver was responsible for this. But really, that's not true. What you do see here are representations and symbols. Again, this returning back to Africa psychologically, and the ways in which you see, I think, which is interesting, this kind of, on the one hand, this symbol of really pre-colonial African resistance, even during the time of imperial conquest around the 1900s, late 1800s, where you saw a number one of wars and resistance on the part of Africans as they started to learn that they're losing their sovereignty, whether it was through force or through signing false treaties. But nevertheless, the spear, again, we see throughout, just like we see the Uncle Sam figure, just like we see the use of red, white, and blue, but even the spear, again, representing this idea, this state of mind, that the African American experience or condition is one of war, is one of resistance. Africa, again, is represented in other ways with visual art. This one is done by a guy named Jeff Donaldson, and it's called The Wives of Shondo. I want you to take a few minutes because it took me a while to look at this photo. I actually got stuck when I was putting it together because initially I knew what I wanted to say, but then it changed. What are some things that people are seeing in this representation of blackness?